The book of Genesis isn't the slightest bit sentimental about family life, and maybe least of all about living with siblings. If you ever had the awkward, frustrating, maybe sorrowful experience of being part of a dysfunctional family, and everyone has to some degree because there's no perfect families, then the landscape of Genesis, as strange and as foreign as it sometimes might feel, may also feel oddly familiar. I grew up with brothers, and I love my brothers, all four of them, but our home was not without conflict. Brothers fight. I'm sure sisters do too. I didn't grow up with sisters, but I'm sure they do. My brothers and I had our fair share of arguments, name-calling sessions, tattletaling. Of course, the semi-frequent scuffles. It generally wasn't anything too hairy, but the usual kind of boys will be boys things, like the time that my older brother chipped my tooth by mushing my face into the TV screen when I wouldn't let him pick what we were watching, even though we only had 2 channels. I once push-kicked my brother Greg through the kitchen wall because he took the last piece of ham, and not like nice, slow-cooked picnic ham. I'm talking like gelatinous lunch meat ham. But it was the principle of the matter, and he should have known that the last piece of ham belongs to the older brother. Genesis 4 tells the tale of the first moment of sibling rivalry in the Bible and the first act of violence in the human story as well. The narrative of Cain and Abel sounds this tone that then echoes and reverberates and replays a dozen times over through the book, hundreds of times over through the Bible, and then right through human history all the way up to the present moment. Tensive sibling relationships are the soil from which much of the story of the Bible grows. Adam and Eve, recently booted from Eden, have 2 children. Cain, the elder, whose name means something like to get or to create. He was created by the man and the woman with the help of God, and they are grateful for it. Abel's name, on the other hand, means vapor or nothingness, a kind of foreshadowing of what follows in the narrative. The 2 brothers each decide to bring an offering to God. Cain, a grain offering, and Abel, choice fatty cuts from the lambs that he tended. God likes Abel's offering, but not so much the offering of Cain, and has never really explained why that is the case. Maybe God is just more carnivore than herbivore. The text doesn't even actually record God requesting an offering, let alone making stipulations for the specifics on how it was to be done. The New Testament makes a comment about the event in the book of Hebrews, simply saying that Abel offered a better sacrifice by faith. But one way or the other, the case is plain that God's favor ends up being the catalyst for Cain's jealousy and anger. God spoke directly to sour Cain about his anger, questioning him and reassuring him that if he did what was right, he would be accepted. But if he didn't, well, sin is lying in wait like a predatory beast ready to pounce and attack. If the sin beast was not controlled, it would do the controlling. This is actually the first time that word sin occurs in the biblical text. It doesn't appear in the story of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit. Here, sin is lethal, seemingly having a life of its own. The stakes are really high for Cain and for each of us regarding how we will handle our anger and jealousy and our self-pity. There will be implications not just on our own lives, but on the lives of our brothers and sisters. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians a warning that's sort of in kind, saying, in your anger, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, and don't give the devil a foothold. So who are you angry with? Think back over the week and how feelings of bitterness or anger affected a relationship with someone you know. How did you resolve the anger? Where's there jealousy in your own life? In what ways are you pitying yourself? Check those feelings. Hear God's serious warning that sin is crouching at the door waiting to control you, and you have to subdue it. Cain did not. Cain was instead mastered by the sin beast. He took his brother into a field and he killed him. Author Alan Paton, who's a South African author, anti-apartheid activist, once asked the question, what broke in a man when he could bring himself to kill another? That's a good question, and it's not an easy one to answer. Another good question is God's question to Cain. Where is your brother? Of course, God knows the answer. He saw the potential of the whole horrific incident taking place all along, and now he's seen the whole ugly scenario unfold. God even says that Abel's blood has cried out to him from the ground. No hidden body of a victimized person goes unnoticed by God. Let's not forget that, as here in our own backyard, the negligence and grisly violence perpetrated against children in the residential school system is being brought out into the light again. God has noticed, and he has heard the cry of their blood from the ground. When God asks the question of Abel's whereabouts, I think his intention is to pierce his brother's heart, and our hearts should be pierced by God's question too. Cain responds to God's questioning with angry, self-defensive counter-questioning of his own. Am I supposed to be my brother's keeper? Am I his guardian? It's like an attempt to dismiss God's point, to dodge his own responsibility for his brother's life and now his death. But the storyteller of Genesis is making this express point. Am I my brother's guardian? Am I his keeper? Well, yes. Actually, unequivocally, yes, you are. Cain isn't the only one who's keen to avoid an admission of guilt or accountability for his brothers. Sometimes that's our story too. So hear the question as God's question to you. Where is your brother, your sister? Despite how we sometimes portray it, life isn't just about keeping our noses clean, staying out of trouble while we make our way forward in life and work as good, honest, tax-paying, church-going citizens. Life in God's world, on God's terms, is profoundly about the way in which we live with the rest of God's creation, and specifically our fellow humans, our brothers and sisters, those who are marked as God's image bearers in this unique, profound way. Each of us needs to hear this question for ourselves. Where is your brother? Where is your sister? We live in this incredibly complicated world today where the choices that we make in things like where we buy our clothes or what types of groceries we stock in our pantries, how we consume, who we vote for, they actually result, often totally unintentionally and without our knowledge, in the blood of brothers and sisters being spilled on the ground. And we need to hear God's question for ourselves. Where is your brother? Where is your sister? The Cain and Abel narrative ends with God's judgment on Cain. And there's this very real consequence for Cain's violence against his brother. He's banished, sent away, sentenced to be a homeless wanderer on the earth. And those of us who might consider ourselves oriented toward retributive justice like this part, there should be serious consequences to grave actions. But of course, the rub comes when God chooses to show extraordinary grace to the murderer Cain. God actually promises a special protection to him. He marks him with a special mark so that no one will harm him. And so similarly to how God preserved and provided for Adam and Eve, even after their disobedience in the garden, God chooses to continue to be a life giver to Cain, even in a moment darkened by the death that he caused. Isn't that just like God, to show mercy to a sinner? Folks like us who have not always chosen to guard and keep our brothers and sisters, folks like us who from time to time can harbor anger and jealousy or make excuses and avoid responsibility, there's mercy for us too. We should know that. And with the grace that we've been offered, we should take seriously the summons here in God's question. Where is your brother? Where is your sister?